Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Are you a parent raising a child who's autistic and needs some help and guidance? Well, my next guest is that such person. So sit back, relax, and grab your favorite beverage, and let's learn more about her and what help she can give you. See you there.
I wanna believe in the truth, but only see what I'm shown. Got the freedom to choose, but can't decide on my own. Follow what the group is thinking, bottle up my intuition till it's popping out the bottom.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Inside the Asperger Studios. Today I'm joined with Kassandra Alvarez. Welcome to the show, Cassandra.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. So excited for this.
Not a problem. So why don't we start off with why don't you tell me a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I am Cassandra. I've worked actually with children with autism for been in the field for about 5 years now. But I started working directly with them, and I've kind of transitioned over more to helping and supporting parents. So that's a lot of what I do now, and it's been a really great experience. You develop this, and you realize that you have so much love for these people, and there's not enough of support out there for them, so it's been
Mhm.
really 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 great. Yeah, that's what I do.
So what inspired you to start working with families who have autistic kids?
I With working in the field for, I think it was about 4 years before actually transitioned into what I do now, I started to realize that the support, even though there's not enough support for people and children with autism and all over the spectrum, there is even less support for families.
Yeah,
Because uh, with all of the therapies that they receive, I feel like 90% of it is for the child. It's not really for the parent. Like there is some meetings and things like that that clinicians do have to have with the families, but there's not enough, and it's not enough for the family to actually, you know, be able to be helped and feel like they're being seen and all of this. So that's kind of how I transitioned into what I do now with just helping directly the family members.
I mean, I totally get you there, and I'm glad you're doing what you're doing because you're right. There aren't really enough support. There's not enough support for both ends if you think about it. There's not
Mhm.
enough support for kids, and there's not nearly enough, like you said, the support for the adults. Because I feel, I don't know how you feel, I feel when a parent realizes their child is autistic, they're thrown into a whole new world and they don't know where to go.
Mhm.
Where did you kind of start off like figuring out how to help these families?
Um, it's it's a lot of my own journey with like understanding, self-development and understanding myself and how I am programmed, which,
Mhm.
can change too. Just like we're all human, right? So we all go through seasons of how we're feeling, how we're, what we're doing in life, things like that. Like, and families go through that too. And like you said, whenever a child with autism is brought into their life, their whole life completely like shifted, right? Like they were given something they weren't expecting, and depending on where that child is, right, some of it can be more complicated and more challenging, and with that, their own mental health can be impacted, which most of the time it is. And so that's where I started realizing is, well, a lot of the times they're not really aware of what's happening in their own head because they are very focused on their child, which there is nothing wrong with that, and you should be because you want for them to make progress and, be a part of the society in whatever way that they're going to be. But they weren't doing enough for themselves. And when I started realizing that, I started working with my families when I was still working directly with the child. I started working with them and putting more effort towards the family. And
Mhm.
whenever I started doing that, whenever we started doing different things to like, hey, let's do something for yourself this weekend, like, and then you'll get back to me. What did that look like? And I started doing that, and I noticed that not only did the mom or the dad and the family altogether, appear to be happier, but they also were a lot more present in their child's therapies. And it's almost like the quality of life just increased because of those little things that we started to do. And the child, too, they also started to make a lot more progress whenever that started happening. And so I realized that the more I started doing it, it was all happening the same way. So I'm like, there's got to be something here. And it's almost not fair to the family for them to not have someone to be working with because they're only really focused on the child. So that's where that started. I just started to get curious, like what if we focused more on the parent?
I
Yeah.
mean, you are so right though, because when you look at it, when a parent realizes their child is autistic and they get them tested, that child, no matter how old they are, when they look at their lives, they're looking from the outside in. And they're like, and they're always questioning why they're different from everyone else. And then the parents don't realize their life just got a monkey wrench thrown into it. And now there's no support for them. There's no help. They don't know where to go.
Hmm.
And what you're doing is a godsend because you're telling these parents, hey, why don't you take time for yourself? Because you are going to be going through a hell of a lot of work to learn and
Hmm.
understand your child. And then I guarantee you through time, when a lot of your parents, I guarantee you, are realizing too, when they get their child tested, they're autistic as well. So it's a double loop.
Yeah. Yeah, that happens more times than not because like their awareness increases so much,
Mhm.
and now all of a sudden they're like questioning, am I autistic or am I, on the spectrum? And the only thing that I can do, right, is to give them the guidance to go get diagnosed or go get tested if that's what they feel like, they need. And a lot of the times it does happen. And and it just, that even changes everything. So it's like, oh, okay, so I wasn't
Yeah.
crazy. And I get that a lot. Like, I wasn't crazy. And I'm like, you were never crazy.
No, I mean,
So,
I've talked with many parents and they're like, oh
yeah,
yeah, I took my kid to get tested, and then all of a sudden it's like, check. All these things are checked. The doctor's reading off of that the kid has traits of. The parents are like, check, check, check. I
yeah,
have all these things, and oh my God, I'm autistic. This explains my whole entire life.
yeah.
They get tested, and then it's like now they have this bond and
Hmm.
understanding, but parents need, I mean, people think the children are the only people who need the support. No, you're right. Parents need it too because they're going through almost twice as much as a child because now they need to learn how to adapt around the child. They need to learn the child's specific traits,
Hmm.
every little thing, because it becomes a whole new learning lesson to them.
Yeah, yeah. And it almost too, like, and especially like this is where I come in, right? Because a lot of the times seem they only know what they know, right? Like we all do. We're all humans, we were raised a certain
Mhm.
way. So that's what we go into adulthood knowing. But a lot of the times, the way that you parent a child with autism, there are a lot of things that, what is normal parenting, but that they learned and they're now parenting their child this way. But when you have a child with autism, there's a lot of things that they're doing and they're like, why is it not working? Why is my child doing all of these different things? And it's well, like you have to do things differently and you have to talk to them differently. And there's a lot of characteristics of autistic people that they if you do this a certain way, it's only going to get worse. Like it's not going to get better. And so that awareness also I feel like parents need more of because they only know what they know. And
Mhm.
I do like there's so much work that needs to be done in the parent with the parent itself, and there's not enough of it. So it's slowly,
Now, what was your first experience like working with a parent who realized their child was autistic?
I actually got to work a little bit with diagnosing. I'm not a doctor, but with my like the degree and the credential, I can do the testing. So I would do all of the testing, and it's not standardized, but there is like a thing that you follow. It's like in person with the child. Um, and a lot of the times you have to have these conversations with them before because they have a lot of questions. Even though you're just there to do the assessment, they have a lot of questions. You talk to them and they're like, they might do this and they might do that, but I just have a feeling that he is or she is. And after the test, you again, like I can't say like yes or no, but I'm like, you should really, wait until the doctor tells you and everything that they're or calls you and everything that you have lived, you need to be able to tell this doctor because if they don't know, with autism, it's very weird the way that it's done because it's observations, there's questionnaires and the family history, and that's really what a diagnosis is. And if they don't know what's happening, they won't be able to give them the correct diagnosis, if any. And so working with the parents, they just have a lot of questions.
Mm.
And a lot of the times, like me, I wasn't able to answer them, but I can give them guidance on like behavior and things like that because that was the experience that I had. But from my experiences, there's just a lot of questions. They don't know what's going to be of their life. They don't even know if they're doing something that they should be doing because of the diagnosis itself. They're like, well, should I be fighting for this diagnosis when it can potentially change their entire like life? And at that point, it's like, well, you have to do what you feel is best because everyone has different beliefs.
Mm.
But I feel like with that specific thing is like getting a diagnosis for your child, you can then help them in a different way than you would have been able to if you'd hadn't had it. Because I'm sure like a lot of times insurances and all of that only pay for the diagnosis if you have it. And so there's that part of it too. So they just have a lot of questions and that was really what my experience was.
You know what I mean? I kind of got lucky with my diagnosis because
Hmm.
I was unofficially diagnosed by family, friends, and my doctor
Hmm.
in my early 20s, but in my early 50s, I came across in autism clinical research for a drug that was supposed to help with communications. And the first thing they had to do was an official diagnosis to see where I was on that spectrum. And I was lucky it was all part of this thing, so I didn't have to worry about insurance or anything. But
Hmm.
to my mother's and I believe it was 4 hours long.
Hmm.
And they divide us up. So because when you give the test, they want your opinion of yourself, not
Hmm.
what your mother thinks, but what you think.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
you're in a different room completely.
yeah, I mean, what the parents don't realize, and I'm sure you see a lot of this, is it's a huge learning experience. And like you said, there's not enough support for them out there.
Hmm.
And for you to do this is great because now they have somewhere to go. They have answers, but it's still not enough, I think, because as a child grows, their questions grow.
Yeah.
How, so that brings up the next question is, do you stay with the family as their child grows to to help answer their questions as they get older? Like, as you know, a lot of kids have eating disorders or sensory issues to food and stuff like that. And I'm sure they come to you because how do I deal with this?
Mhm. Yeah, the experience that I've had so far with my families that I've worked with is obviously I'm very still very new to it, and within the last like 2, 3 years. And the recommendation that I give them is I feel like just the way that I've built up and the relationships that I've been able to develop, I think that they will stay with me forever. And even though I can tell them like, hey, like if you ever need anything, it's a lot of the times on me to reach out to them
Mm.
and ask them how they're doing and check up on them. because they, and I'm sure you've lived this maybe too, is or you've realized that if you sometimes a lot of people they won't ask for help.
Hmm.
And that's our, everyone is very different with that. Some people are very good at asking, but some people aren't. And I think whenever you throw a person with autism into the mix, they're a lot more hesitant. They do have a lot of questions, but they're hesitant to ask for help. And so I am able to support them as long as they allow me to. And that's how I see it because autism doesn't just have an end date, it's
Yeah.
they're autistic for the rest of their life. And so yeah, I would love to support families if they allowed me to. But it's a lot of the times I feel like it's on me to reach out to them because it just is, human experience, right? Like we don't ask for help because we either don't want to burden someone, we don't want to bother anyone, we are embarrassed of what's happening and things like that. So that's how I do it at least.
No, I mean, that brings up a good question is I'm sure
Mhm.
you get a lot of families that come to you who are overwhelmed and stuff. How do you gain their trust enough to trust you to say, hey, I'm here to help.
Mhm.
Let's deal with how you are overwhelmed and take it apart piece by piece.
Yeah, I'm a very direct person. Um, I, as much as I love like people asking me how I'm doing, things like that, I also feel like a lot of the times people don't really care to answer that question because, they've lived a lot of their life maybe like getting asked it and they're like, well, what do you care? So I'm very direct and I just ask them questions. And the more that they share with me, they'll, we'll develop a relationship. And eventually, I love to talk to them like on Zoom, how we are now. And that helps even more because then that gives them an opportunity. Like if they wanted to just vent to me about things that they're going through, they can. And I feel like when you allow someone to just express how they're feeling and all of these things without judgment and just you're there to listen, that relationship deepens because that means when they're telling you all of these things, that means that they trust you to a certain level, especially with things that they probably can't talk about with other people because they're afraid of being judged or they don't have anyone to do so.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of how I do it is I'll ask them questions direct about like the things that I may have an idea of what they're going through. And I feel like that also is like, oh, how did you know? Like, how did you know that I'm going through that? Or how do you know that I feel burnt out? It's like, well,
Mhm.
because it's just the reality of it, right? Like having a child, but having a child with autism, there's a lot more that comes with it. So that's how I do it.
Now that brings me up to an interesting question.
Hmm.
How, as you know, parents have to deal with the fact that eventually their child will have a meltdown.
Hmm.
And I know that's one of the common things that they're probably coming to you with is how do I deal with a child who's got a meltdown? How do I handle it? How do I approach it? What is your technique to saying, okay, here's a step-by-step thing we need to do to get your child out of that meltdown, get them into a safe place? Because
Hmm.
as you and I know, meltdowns don't happen at home all the time. They can happen while you're out with your child.
Yeah, yeah. With meltdowns, I feel like there's a lot of work before the meltdown even happens that I feel like will just benefit a parent. And I'll talk about that after I say this. As far as like when the meltdown happens, the biggest thing which, again, if you don't know this, you wouldn't know to do it, is to like get to a point where you are making sure that you are prioritizing yourself and not reacting to the situation. Because if you and this is the biggest thing I feel like that a lot of the times parents aren't aware because they're so frustrated that the meltdown is happening and they're like, oh, another meltdown, or they're in public and everyone's looking at them and they're just embarrassed at what's happening. And so what we start with is making sure, and this is like a few seconds, right? Because some people do need a few minutes, but when it's happening, you have to be quick, right? Like you have to be on your feet. And so the first step that we always do is, okay, make sure that we are taking a deep breath and we're responding in a calm way because if you don't, the child, it's like they say, like, will match that energy. And so the more that you are hysterically screaming, the more that they are likely to hysterically scream. And so that is the biggest thing that we work on. One, once we get, out of there, whenever a child is having a meltdown, it can be for whatever reason, maybe something isn't going their way, maybe they didn't get what they want, things like that. And it's can be really hard for them to de-escalate. So the biggest thing that I always have my families do is make sure that they're calm first and you're not talking to them as like a lot while in the middle of it because they're not processing anything that you're telling them. The biggest thing that you should do is just be like, I'm here, you're safe, things like that, if you wanted to at all. But if not, just being there for them and just being a support system for your child in that moment. And I know some parents are like, no, but they're having a meltdown. Why would you do that? Well, because your child isn't processing anything that's happening. They are so upset and they are so dysregulated at what they're feeling that it doesn't matter if you're telling them stop, if you're telling them don't do that, it's not going to process. And so once, they've gotten to the point where they're calmer, then and if they're able to talk to you or they're able to communicate to you at that point, you can then talk to them about like, again, like making sure that they are aware too that they're safe, you're here for them, building that connection and that trust with them after it's over. And then after, I always tell them, I always have my families like go through like a debriefing process with your child, whether they can communicate with you or not. You tell them, like, this is what was happening, and explain to them what got to the point that they had a meltdown. And then after that, take a moment to regulate yourself and de-escalate because you're probably still really, really angry or really, really upset that happened. And you're probably overstimulated as well. So once the debriefing happens, then make sure that you take care of yourself, whether that be you take a walk, whether that be you sit in silence with your child, maybe even like hugging them or whatever it is that you need to do. But the last step I think would be or is to, make sure that you take care of you, and make sure that you get to a point where your nervous system is okay. Because if you don't, you're going to be on edge all day and the rest of the day or however long it's going to happen. So that would be like my process on how I have my parents manage that. But like I said, there's a lot that goes before that because you have to increase their awareness of all of these things, which a lot of the times parents don't come in to my space knowing a lot of that.
And it's so true because when a child has a meltdown, parents don't know how to respond. And
Hmm.
you're right. When you said when a parent comes to the child in such a state, that child's only going to turn around and amplify it up. And then
Yeah.
it becomes a bigger issue. The child becomes louder and won't listen and is trying to soothe himself or herself.
Hmm.
That parent needs to, you're right when you say needs to step back and regulate themselves first. Get
Hmm.
themselves in the right mindset because otherwise it's the child's not going to listen to you if you come into them in an aggravated or an angry state because they're at that point when everything is just in the reset and their mind's not taking anything. It's just listening and going out.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially I feel like if it's in public, because when we all have seen like a parent or anyone yell at someone else in public and we don't like how it feels with us, so like imagine how the other person must be feeling when someone is yelling at them in public. And even just yelling in general, like there are other ways to communicate that you are angry or you're frustrated. And in that moment when the child is having a meltdown, if you're yelling at them, one, I obviously don't know what's going on inside their head, but the reaction after is it appears like they don't feel safe. You're yelling at them. They're scared of you at that point because like, why are you yelling at me? It's just becoming more frustrated. And I've seen it, it can prolong the meltdown even longer. And why would you want that if there is a different way to do it and manage it?
Now, how do you deal with a family whose first getting a diagnosis of their child and they find out they're a newly diagnosed child of autism. How do you deal with it? Because I know coming to you, they're in all sorts of denial and shock, and
Mhm.
because I know a lot of people don't like the word disability or disabled because it says that their child can't do anything because of this disability. How do you deal with them and saying, don't go by the label, go by what
Mhm.
you know your child can do?
Yeah. The families that I've worked with that have come to me and they're recently diagnosed, um, it depends on the family because sometimes they are so like with you on the things that you are trying to do, and they're very open to a lot of things because they want to help their child. And it's not that the other family maybe doesn't want to, because they do. They just they just don't really know like what it is that just happened almost. And whenever you start telling them all of these things and you're trying to teach them things, a lot of the times you see that they won't even like respond because they're like, well, that's not going to work for my child.
Mhm.
Um, and whenever those families come, the way that I do it honestly is I give them a little bit of a like a week or two of just like trust building. So this is a time where I am really like connecting with them and asking them questions and kind of like working with them indirectly. So asking them questions about what things are happening in their life and kind of like so how's this going? And like what we talked about earlier, they're like, well, how did you know that was happening? Or like, are they having trouble communicating with you? If so, like, what is it that's happening? Or how are they communicating with you? What does their like transitions look like? And all of the things that I know that most of the time children with autism are more likely to struggle with. And because they start to realize like, oh, she does know what she's talking about, or actually she is aware of like what is going on. That is what really helps. And so that 1 or 2 weeks that we've been doing all of that, it's allows them to gain to trust you, and then to be able more willing to implement the things that you are having them do. And it doesn't work with every family. Obviously, some families are, I wouldn't say that they're not wanting to help their child, but they don't want to change the way that they're doing things because they don't believe that it will help them. And so with those types of families, it happens naturally to where they kind of just stop communicating with you and they stop showing up. And so unfortunately, as much as you want to help them, like I said before, they won't allow you to. And so the biggest thing that I can do is I'll check up with them, and even if they don't respond to me, I'll just take it with a grain of salt, but I'll be there. And if they ever do need it, because at some point I'm sure they will, and I'll just be there whenever they do. And so that's how I've been able to work that way.
Now, what kind of transformations have you seen with the families you work with?
Yeah. The biggest ones, and I mentioned this before, has been the quality of life of whatever their life to be just gets so much better. They're a lot more peaceful, they're a lot more calm. And that definition is different for everyone, right? So that's like
Mhm.
something that we go over in the very beginning. Like, what is it that you want and what does that look like? And so it's a lot of that. So they are just a lot more happier. They're a lot more willing to do things, and they're more open to things, and they're willing to change their mindset a little bit with different things as they come up. And whenever those things start happening, the child also, they I had one family, for example, we started working on self-care with the mom. She was
Mhm.
the only parent, and they had been working with the child to get like work on potty training. I think it had been like 6 months, and there was just nothing, no success. So we started working with the mom on like self-care, getting, working with her to take care of herself more and prioritize her. And so they paused potty training, and then I was like, well, let's start it back up again, because I noticed she was a lot happier. She was more willing to have conversations. And you know, when like someone is really sad, you can feel it. And when someone is really happy and like good, and it doesn't always necessarily mean that that's true. And that's because it could just be like a front. But with this specific family, she was like, she was so happy and loving her life in that moment. And so I was like, let's go ahead and just start back up again and see what happens. And so at that point, she was more willing to take her child to the bathroom. She was more willing to follow the routine because she had been feeling good. And so the child within like 4 days, I think it was, he was fully potty trained.
Wow.
And I was like, and whenever that happened, I'm like, what do you think changed? And I would ask her these questions. And she's like, I truly feel like I am just in such a better headspace right now that I was more willing to show up for my child in a different way that I was not able to do before. And so all of those different things, it's it's not like you're, you know, because you're not working with the child, you're working with the parent, but it's they have no idea like how correlated it can be. So that's been a little bit of the transformations that I've seen.
I mean, you're so true because what parents don't realize is that the child reads their body language. Even though we don't see it, we
Mhm.
kind of feel it and read it. So if you come across in such a mind state that you're unhappy and you're
Yeah,
upset, the child's gonna read that energy and not want to comply.
yeah, yeah. It's like with any human being, right? You go into a room and it's like they're having a very serious conversation and you're just like awkwardly sitting
Yeah.
there. But then you go into a room when they're laughing and they're just having a great time. You're probably going to be laughing and having a great time. It's the same thing, especially like except like this is in their home with their own child. You know, your child feels the way that you feel. They feel it.
It kind of reminds me of a story of when I was going away with for something for school called the Snowball.
Mm,
It was like a district-wide thing where all these schools get together to promote wellness and positivity. And I I never knew I was autistic at the time, and
mhm,
I wanted to try to incorporate, make people loosen up. So I went to the back of the bus with everybody and I started goofing around, trying to get cars to honk their horns and everything.
mhm,
And that night we had something where we all sat around the campfire and asked people, what do they think of me? And everyone's like, oh, I love the fact that you were able to like blend in with all of us and just feel free and comfortable instead of being so off-put and cold. You
mhm.
just joined in and had fun.
Yeah, yeah. I'm assuming like that helped them also join in and
Mhm.
have fun. Yeah.
Now, that kind of brings up an interesting question about how do you deal with a family that comes to you and realizes their child, one, is autistic, but two, they realize their child's nonverbal? Because I
Mhm.
know that's a challenge, and that becomes a bigger challenge on top of just the autism. Now their child won't speak and will only communicate via either electronic tools or
Mhm.
pointing. How do you deal with a parent who has a nonverbal child?
Yeah. Um, I'm gonna talk about mainly the parents that maybe are like the denial phase of it, where they think that they will end up talking one day. Because other side of it, the parents that are super like, well, you know, they understand if they've accepted it, they're super open to whatever will work for that child a lot of the
Right.
times. On the other side, I've experienced, I feel like all of the options. There's families where they don't want to introduce any sort of device or any sort of opportunity for them to communicate because they are so hopeful that they will talk. And you can't blame a family for feeling this way because
Mm.
it's you want your person that you love and brought into this world to communicate with you via talking. But the more and sometimes it takes us, you know, months for them to finally accept that they may not be able to. But what I will do whenever that happens, if they allow me to, because they also you can't force them to do something outside of them working with you. So like the only thing that I can do is ask them like how it's going and ask them to show me how it's going. But I'll always bring up like, okay, is there's other communication, other forms of communicating? Like which one do you feel like you like the best? And the reason that I ask is which one do you like the best is because if they don't agree with what you are having them do, the chances of them implementing it are very low. And so even though there's children that I know like would thrive off of an AAC device, but their parent wants for them to work on sign language, and I tell them, "Hey, an AAC device is what will work best for your child." They won't do it because they want to teach them sign. And so we're like, we'll start with some sign. Sure, that works. But the more that they work on sign, for example, they're like, well, actually, I don't know sign language. So how am I going to communicate with them?
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, so are you open to other things? And so there's, because some people won't will not even be able to use an AAC device. There's because that you have to use your fingers, and sometimes you're not able to. But some people will only be able to communicate via gestures or even some eye contact where they'll like point to or like show you where they want. And there's just all forms of different communication opportunities that are out there. But I'll always, you know, have them like be try and get them to the point where they're open to other forms of communication. And if they are so set on them communicating via voice, then okay, let's do that for a little bit, like let's try it and teach them how to imitate. Let's make sure that we're narrating. And once we see that that's not really going anywhere, if it doesn't, then I'll be like, okay, well, then we'll start with like some picture cards. Like, let's start with some picture cards. And then once they see that maybe that's not working, they're more open to something else. Even though like my goal maybe might be to like an AAC device or like, hey, sign language would work really well for your child. But you have to start somewhere. And you also have to allow them to see that something isn't working the way that they hope that it would. And it has to be something that they are also like okay with doing because like I said before, if they're not agreeing with it, like some people don't want AAC devices and you have to respect it. But even though you know better, like, hey, this could be the best thing for your child, just give it an opportunity. But if they don't agree with it and if they don't want it, they're not going to do it. The doctor can prescribe it, but if they don't agree with it, they're not going to have their child do it. And so it's a lot of different ways that you can go about it, but that's been my experience.
Now that brings up another question is
Mhm.
what challenges do parents of autistic kids face that most people don't see?
Parents in general is with the ones that I've worked, um, they have expectations for their child that maybe they're never going to be able to get there. And you know that as, a
Mhm.
clinician, because you've worked with so many in the past. And miracles do exist. Like I don't like put that to the side, but it's not something that you go into banking on because you just never know. And so I feel like the well, how would I even say this? Like they need to be open to different things. And a lot of the times they're not because they've been so used to doing things a certain way. And I feel like that's the biggest challenge that I face when working with parents and families
Mhm.
because again, like it goes with trust and all of these things, but they're not open to a lot of things because they know what they know. And I feel like that is the biggest challenge that I face and I see with families. And not because they're not educated on it, but just because they're not open to it.
Mhm.
And and they're comfortable with the way that they've been doing things. And but it's like, okay, but if you do it this way, it can be so much better. You have no idea.
Mhm.
But yeah, that to me is like the biggest challenge.
Now we both know parents get advice and different different things and they hear different things about autism. What's one of the biggest myths about autism you wish every parent knew wasn't true?
There are so many. Mm, mm. Can I say anything?
Yeah, you can say
Like
anything.
anything? Okay. And this one, up to this point in the world, the developments and the science and all of that, I believe that the whole detoxing um, thing that's happening right now, I believe that it can maybe potentially help a child, but I feel like there's other things that go with it and not the detoxing itself. And I just wish that parents did a lot more research on what that really entails before doing something like that, because especially when you give a child like chemicals and things like that, you don't know how it can affect them long term. And it might, quote unquote, cure whatever it is that they're looking to cure in that moment, but it could also harm them so much more in the future. And it's almost like a, how would you say it? Like temporary happiness,
Mhm.
but it's really damaging and setting them up for failure in the future. That's how I see it. And just from everything that I've experienced.
I mean, it's so true. I mean, the term that comes to my head when you think about it is internet parenting. P Parents reading information and watching TikToks and trying to learn about their child from the internet when what they really should be doing is solid research, talking to doctors, talking to professionals, people like you to really understand what these things can do to their child, not just
Mhm.
now, but in the long run, and what
Yeah.
can really help them.
Yeah. And it's also I feel like it's very temporary because you might experience happiness because your child is now talking and things like that, but at the end of the day, they are still a human being.
Mhm.
So if you don't get to like the root of it, which is like I feel like it starts with parents taking care of themselves, and that really changes the trajectory of the child's life too. But if they don't take care of themselves and they're still just like showing up and putting in 100% for their child, then they're leaving themselves on empty, then what really was that detox, quote unquote, for? If it does work and it does, maybe in the future it'll be like, actually, that is a way to cure autism, we just never know. But it's still like you're still going to have challenges that you would as a parent for parenting a neurotypical child, So that's not going to go away. You're just going to, the challenges that you're going to face might look a little bit different, but you're still going to face challenges being a parent. Every parent knows that. So that's how I see it too, is like, it's really just quote unquote solving a very small part of the child.
Now, how do you we know parents, I mean, they come to you and everything else, but one of the biggest problems I see a parent face is advocating for their child, whether it's
Mhm.
in the school systems or help with dealing with healthcare. How do you help a parent advocate for their child to say, hey, you need to speak up for your child
Yeah.
whether in grammar school and especially with high school because they need to know how to get their IEPs done.
Yeah. Yeah. Advocating is I feel like a full-time job for families, especially when you're parenting a child with autism, because a lot of the times families come to me and they don't know what the law is.
Hmm.
And that's a very big thing because in the United States, there's so many different states, and every state, for the most part, has a different law when it comes to a child with a disability and IEPs in itself. And also the school district
Mhm.
is very different too. And so what I always have them do, they'll ask me questions and they'll say like this is what's been going on. And some parents have very great experiences in the school system. Like there is that part of it too. But most of the times their experience hasn't been the best. And so I always the the one thing that I always tell all of my families is you know your child better than anyone else. And if schools are saying that your child is not doing things or that they're fine in the setting that they are in, and you don't believe that, then you've got to find a way and make sure that you're following up with them because a lot of the times administrators have a lot to
Mhm.
do and they won't follow up with you unless you follow up with them. Because you're just a to-do list in their to-do list. They're just you're literally like in the list of things that they have to do, and they may not have to prioritize it because they have the other things that are maybe more important for them. And so is you know your child better than anyone. And so if you feel like they're not where they need to be and they're in a different setting that's you know is not going to help them, then make sure that you're following up with those people that can change things for you because you know your child better than anyone. And if they're in a school in a setting, like maybe they're in a regular classroom and they just have an IEP and you know that your child is not going to thrive there, then it's just on you to make sure that you are showing up for them and following up with these with the administrators to make that change. And
Mhm.
also, you know, in addition to knowing what the law is, because there's deadlines and things in some states where this is the day that I'm requesting the IEP. The IEP has to be completed by this date. Like that's a rule in some states. And so if it's not completed by then, you know, there's there's things that you need to do in order for that to be done. And so knowing the law is super important as well.
I mean, that's so important because I've talked with families who said, yeah, that followed up with the school and they said, yeah, your kid's on the list, your kid is IEP is already filed and everything is all set. And then it turns out
Mhm.
the child isn't getting the support they need. And then they call
Yeah.
back and they go, oh, it was never filed at all.
Hmm.
This is why follow-up is so important. And you are right, though, when a parent needs to advocate because just because the child has an IEP in the school doesn't mean the school's going to be right for him.
Yeah,
It, and that brings
exactly.
up a really good story. I had talked with the assistant minister of autism, and she told me the story about how this one parent had their child in the first school, and the school wasn't working out for him. So she's like, okay, we're going to try the next school, and the next school didn't work. And she's like, if this
Hmm.
school doesn't work, we're going to homeschool you. The third
Hmm.
school, he put him in. He thrived because the school was right. The teachers knew how to deal with him. They had
Hmm.
all the right materials. It's so important for a parent to know how to advocate for your child, to follow up and make sure your child's getting the right treatment in the school and the right education.
Hmm. And something too, and you made a point to it, is like a different school may work better. And
Hmm.
that's another thing too, is that sometimes parents, you know, they have their house and they really can't move.
Hmm.
But sometimes like and it has happened, I've seen it happen where, you know, the reality is that if you want to, for your child to be in a setting that really does benefit them, then you will have to, especially if you live in like smaller towns, is what I've seen.
I mean,
Yeah.
I have a really good friend who's got two kids. She was a guest on my show, and one child's got autism and one's got ADHD, and they both
Mm,
need separate things. They're both in two different schools that make them that they're perfect for them to help them thrive.
yeah.
And she will travel to the schools
Mm,
and work things out. And it's a 2 hour drive. I mean, families need to realize at some point in time you have to make the sacrifice.
yeah. Yeah. And the 2 hours, like some people won't be willing to do that, but then you have to accept that. Like you know, maybe I can't do it. And whatever you decide, you know, you're doing the best that you can, and that's okay. You know, you'll figure it out at some point. It'll be okay. Or maybe it not, but that's just something that you have to accept. And because there's a lot of sacrifices and things that you won't be able to do and you won't be able to do for your child when you have a child with autism. And being okay with however that turns out is something else that's really big.
Now, do you support do you offer tools for the parents, like workbooks or anything for them to use to help them deal with their child?
I do it individualized. So I do have like general ones that I have, but most of them are teaching them how to better prioritize and take care of themselves. And if there is something that they're specifically working with, like for example, I do like a group program every like 6 weeks that I run, and I do it like I'll do something based on whatever the group is going through. So if they're maybe having a hard time, like I've had a lot of people that have contacted me having a hard time with like sensory issues. So their clothing, dressing, and maybe even like food sensory issues. And so I'll do something based on that. And so it really just depends, but I'm super open to like creating things and doing things for them because at the end of the day they need it. So yeah, that's kind of what I offer.
Now, that brings up an interesting question. How do you deal with a family when they realize that their child has sensory issues like touch, smell, or taste? I mean, because I know that's hard to deal with, especially when it comes to getting them to eat.
Yeah. Yeah, I so recently I've changed a lot of like my perspective on that because with the like clothing, for example, clothing is clothing, and everyone likes and feels comfortable in different things. And so the way that I see it is if it's not affecting your quality of life, like the child, like if they're not you know, they may not look the way that you want them to. And I feel like it's the parents' own expectations and our own expectations of how we think they should look. But if a child wants to wear, let's say, like red all of the time, they're not really hurting anyone. They're not really hurting themselves. Allow them to do that if that's what makes them feel comfortable and that's what keeps them from having a meltdown. Then I say, there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's just like as a parent, sometimes you just have to be able to accept that because you may not want them to wear red all the time, but they want to do it. So I think it's like expectations versus what the child wants. And then for food, it's there's different things because sometimes the food that they're eating and what they're like comfortable with isn't benefiting them because of, the health issues.
Mhm.
Like sometimes it's a lot of what I see a lot of like packaging, like Oreos and chicken nuggets and things like that. And well, we all know that those aren't the best foods for them. But if that is what they are liking and they're not open to anything else, then it's just a matter of you being making sure that you're taking them to the doctor and actively doing testing on them so that you know where their levels and their labs are at to make sure that if they're not getting the things that they need out of the food that they like, then you're finding different ways to be able to get them the nutrients and the minerals and vitamins that they need. Because it's with feeding, I mean, any person can tell you this, like it can be very challenging to
Yeah.
get them to change the things that they like,
Mhm.
especially when they've been doing it for so long. So though that's how I see it is like me if they're not open to change and if you're not willing to like work through that with them, then there are other ways to get them the things that they need. It's just a matter of finding what works and what they're willing to do.
I mean, that's so true because what parents don't realize is if they don't approach their child the right way when it comes to eating, it could lead to an eating disorder,
Yeah,
their anorexia or ARFID, and then they got bigger problems to deal with. They got to work with find somebody that can get their child off and deal with the eating disorder and get them back to the way they were.
yeah.
And what's amazing is I had a guest on just recently who works with those who have ARFID, and she's like, the majority of her clients are all neurodiverse, are all
Mm,
autistic or have ADHD. And a lot of it is either because of the fact they are sensory issued with food or because the
mhm.
parents don't know how to deal with it. And the only way they know how to deal with it is to force the kid to eat something they don't want to eat. And they don't realize
Yeah.
by doing that, they're causing bigger problems.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. It's yeah, with feeding, that's a challenging one, but it's not impossible to work with either. So it's just a matter of you got to be willing to try different things for sure. Something
No.
else that
Mhm.
I feel like it's important to mention is whenever you have children or people that are only sticking to the same foods because that's what they know and that's what they
Mhm.
like and that's what they're comfortable with. I think sometimes parents don't because they'll just buy that, and they don't offer anything new. But never stop offering them new foods because you never know if there's ever a day that they may want to try it. So, and I feel like that's something that I see parents don't do enough of is like offering them new foods.
Now, what keeps you motivated to keep helping these families?
Hmm. I I feel like for me, it's I know the amount of families in the world that need help, and I want to be able to help them. And so just knowing the numbers and knowing how much it's increasing and knowing how much families are more and more having a child that's diagnosed that aren't aware, it's what keeps me motivated. And the more that I have conversations with families that don't know what to do, the more I'm like, I need to help more people. And I really think that that's what keeps me going. Yeah.
Now, if a parent feels hopeless right now, what would you want them to hear from you first?
Hmm. If a parent feels hopeless right now, um, what I would tell them is to you are doing so much more than you think that you are. You just don't give yourself enough credit. Yeah.
All right. And finally, where can people find out more about you online?
All of my social medias are Prompt Path. That's the name of my business. So PromptPath. And my name is Cassandra, so they'll be able to connect that on there. Yeah.
And that's it, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Reed Miles. That was Kassandra Alvarez, and I'll see you in the next one. Thank you, Cassandra.
Yeah. Thank you.